With Christmas right around the corner, of course, I know we have to have Thanksgiving first, and we always say that that reminds us of the fact that the rapture comes before the tribulation. We see the signs of Christmas, and everyone cries foul,
Yeah.
saying, "Well, what about Thanksgiving?" Well, that's the same thing in our idea of how the rapture is.
Right. Once one's coming, we know the other is going to be even closer.
Yeah,
When I was speaking the other day, my intro was, my favorite time of year is coming up, and everybody looks at me like it's Thanksgiving because of
yeah.
the belly. But no, it's actually Christmas. I really enjoy Christmas time. There's a lot of neat things about Christmas that most people don't think about.
Yeah. Well, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about these nativities and really talk about the Christmas nativity, as it were, and what the difference is and some of the things that might be misconceptions of this.
Yeah, the nativity is just a fancy word for birth. What happened at your birth? What happened at your nativity?
Okay.
And so, to begin with, everybody had a nativity. So
Yeah.
here we're looking at Jesus's nativity,
Yeah.
and we've always had some misconceptions. I worked at a hospital for a while, and that hospital was uh, owned by Catholic people, very
Hmm.
nice people, did amazing work at the hospital,
Yeah.
and they always had a nativity up, and it
Yeah.
was the standard one, kind of like the one over by you,
Yeah.
and they had the wise men that were on one side of the grounds,
Oh,
and
yeah.
every day they would move them closer and closer to Jesus.
Well, that's an interesting thing to see them moving him closer and closer to show that actual arrival of the wise men.
Yeah,
But you mentioned this little one right here, and it does have like this barn shape to it.
I think most people have that kind of in their mind. When we think of a place where we keep livestock,
Hmm.
you look at my house, I've got goats and stuff, and I have buildings that kind of resemble that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and while we take our trips to Israel, Dr. Lindsted and I do a lot of these trips, and a couple of year, and we always take everyone to the Church of the Nativity, but most of the time we don't bother going to the little star that's on the ground that they claim is the birthplace. In fact, we actually go to what they call the Cave of Saint Jerome,
Hmm.
and that's supposedly where Jerome did some translation work and whatnot. But we take people to the cave because we like to say, you know what? Your idea of a nativity really came from Germany,
Hmm.
from
Yep.
Martin Luther's time frame, than really what the nativity picture might have looked like.
Yeah, that is for sure. The idea of how things were made back then and what materials are had far different than what you find in the very lush forestry of Germany.
Yeah,
Germany had lots and lots of forests, and they still have a lot of woods there.
yeah,
But it's quite a bit different than what you would find in Israel, especially in Jerusalem and Bethlehem area.
without a doubt. I can tell you right now from all of our travels that wood is a precious commodity compared to something like stone.
Right.
Wood is scarce in Israel. It's not something you just go hack down a bunch of trees and build a house. In fact, most houses are built of stone and now concrete with a stone facade.
Yeah, I've been reading, my yearly read through the Bible, and I'm in the part now where David made deals with the people in Lebanon
Mm,
to get the cedars
yeah,
to build the stuff they needed to build because they don't have trees and wood at their disposal in their own homeland.
sure. Well, in Israel, when you build a home or when you erect a house, right now, of course, it's like I say, it's poured concrete with a stone facade.
Right.
But back in this time, you would have hewn stone from the side of a mountain or from the ground and stacked it up to build your house,
Right.
leaving this empty cave. And this is where you would have put your animals.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of times I've seen where they take this place where they hewn out all the stone and they build on top of it.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
so your stable is actually kind of under your house too.
Yep.
And your animals kind of live with you on what I would call the ground floor,
Yeah.
and then you
Yeah.
would go, of course, up above them and stuff like that. So,
And that's the same thought in Venice when I visited Venice.
oh
The
yeah,
ground floor is the warehouse. The middle floor of the palace, they call them, is the business floor, and the top floor is the residence.
yeah,
And that's the same kind of a thought pattern. But what's interesting is to think about that as a cave.
Hmm.
So, like the little small one there next to you, and of course this nice big one here. These are all from Bethlehem. This is all made of olive wood
Yes.
from Bethlehem, and we do have these up on our website. People can welcome to go shop there if they'd like. Everything we have comes from Israel, but the cave I think is more representative,
Yes.
and it's an interesting thing to see in Israel, the shift from nativity barn to cave in
Yep.
the tourist shops, and it's really starting to take a big pull there now.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing that we went to a museum that was in a little town in Kansas. It was called Neo Ephrata,
Ephrata, yeah, yeah,
and they actually have stone mangers.
yes,
So when we think of a manger, we think of a wooden manger, a place for them to put the food for the animals, to
yeah,
eat, and but they would have used stone
yeah.
as well for
Yeah.
that. So
Well, and that ties right into the exact location thinking of the birth of Christ. There, there's two Bethlehems,
yes, absolutely, yep,
but there is Bethlehem Ephrata, and this is closer to Jerusalem.
yes,
It's in a place where the Levitical shepherds or the priestly shepherds would have been raising Passover lambs. And so we really think if you look at it, you can see the Church of the Nativity is in this proper area,
hmm,
but there's also another field off to the side there that's also in the proper area. I don't think we'll ever know the actual perfect location of the birth of Christ, though.
no, I don't think so. And I kind of have a belief about this, and I think that God isn't going to necessarily let us find a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
And when I say stuff, I mean like this is where Jesus was born. Here's
yeah,
Noah's
yeah,
Ark. Here is because what's going to happen is man is going to figure out a way to turn that into an idol,
yep, yep.
and then visiting that site is more important than worshiping God, and people will be worshiping that site.
Do you mean like making a trip to Mecca
Oh yeah, yeah,
or making a trip to the Sistine Chapel
yes,
or
yeah,
all these other things? But yeah, I think you're spot on there. I think it's perfectly right to assume that man would worship the creation
yeah.
more than the creator. In fact, it's biblical that'd be a problem.
And that seems to have happened over and over again. And we were reading an article about something that happened back in the 1200 BC in Israel, and Israel was worshiping idols at that time, and so
Yeah.
it wouldn't have been anything for. You may say today, I would never do that, but
Yeah.
what is your idol? Is your idol the computer?
Yeah.
Mm, you
It
know,
might be that little fancy phone thing you carry
oh
around.
yeah,
The little pocket idols. In fact, there's a man at Abraham's tent. It's a place we like to eat dinner. I think you remember him.
yep,
He says, "Some of you carry your idol in your pockets," and it
yes,
goes ding a ling a ling.
yeah,
So that's pretty fun to go there. But one of the things it being in a cave though, and this hewn stone means that there's sharp edges.
yes,
And the
yes.
same thing for the Levitical shepherds when they were raising Passover lambs. And the Passover lambs had to be perfect, so they would wrap them in swaddling clothes to keep them from getting marked or marred against the cave or against the manger.
Yeah, I think that's a rather unique thing. Like I
Yeah,
said, I raise goats. I know many people that have goats and sheep, and no one I know does that.
yeah,
We don't do that. But in that area, it makes sense because the sacrifices all had to be perfect.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so the priest shepherds, no less,
Hmm.
would take care of that differently. And I find it interesting that Mary wrapped Jesus that way also.
Yeah. Well, I think it was probably what was available to her,
Yes.
but I think intentionally it was available to her. And then when the angel or the messenger of God says to the priest, the child's been born, you'll find him laying in a manger,
Yep.
wrapped in swaddling clothes.
Yep. If it was something that happened all the time, then it wouldn't have been a very good indicator of who he was.
Exactly. Well, and as a Levitical priest, shepherd that
Yep.
wraps lambs for sacrifice in swaddling clothes, I think they made the exact. They thought, wait a minute, we have got to go check this out. Something is odd here.
It's kind of interesting. When my daughter was a baby, she was a very hard girl to go to sleep. She wanted to stay awake, and so we would do what they call swaddling
Mm,
her,
mm,
which is we take a blanket and wrap her.
Yeah.
But I think swaddling clothes is a little bit different. If I understand this right, and you may know better than I think it's strips of fabric that they
Yeah.
wrapped around each individual limb
Yep.
and around the torso. It wasn't like a big blanket.
Yeah, it wasn't a binding. It wasn't really meant to contain them.
Right.
It was just meant to protect them from bumping into a wall or hitting a corner of something or another heel of another baby lamb or goat squishing against them.
Now, there's something interesting about that, and I know that our Catholic friends have taken this to the next degree, the next step,
Yeah,
and I kind of find the swaddling clothes. Jesus was born for a reason,
yeah,
and the reason is he was going to die,
yeah,
and I think that's a foretaste of him being wrapped in grave clothes,
Sure.
which is kind of the same thing.
yeah, yeah,
I think the Catholic Church, though, would think that it was the same exact swaddling clothes
yeah.
that he was wrapped in, and I don't think I buy that at all. But
I don't know that somebody would have kept that stuff.
right,
It's just like if the majority of the people thought that he wasn't the Messiah
Mm.
when he was crucified, who would have kept the cross? I think that if you take all the shards, and I'm kind of halfway joking at this,
yeah,
but I think if you take all the shards of cross around the world that are found in all these
shops and
well, not the shops, but let
Oh.
alone the churches, these
Yeah.
cathedrals that say, well, we've got part of the cross. You probably have about a 30-foot tall cross.
well, that, and my thought is I don't think that the Romans would have made a cross for each individual person.
No, yeah, you're correct. I don't think that it was saved. I think
No.
people discarded it and went on their way.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to look at that, though, but really it just kind of comes back to the point that we'd like to show that the nativity probably happened in a cave rather
Yeah.
than in a barn. And
Absolutely, and it probably happened in a stone manger instead of the manger that you have at your Christmas play. Now, I don't think that that's a bad thing.
No,
I don't think
yeah.
that I don't want anybody to think I'm condemning
Yeah,
for
yeah.
making a wooden building with a wooden manger.
Well, you mean look at it this way: the tabernacle is a foreshadowing,
Yes,
right? So do I? I don't know that I believe that the tabernacle of heaven or the temple in heaven, was built without hands. It says.
Yeah.
I don't know that I think it looks identical to the one we have here on earth. It could.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's a representation,
Right.
and using a representation of something is quite biblical. Christ uses representations in his parables a lot
Yeah.
too.
So I think even a wooden manger and a wooden building
Yeah.
helps bring to mind
Yeah.
what I would say the poorness
Yeah.
in which
Yeah.
Jesus was born, and I think that had to be. I think Jesus had to be born poor,
Sure.
and it even says in the Bible he wasn't anything to look at. So he was a very average person. You probably wouldn't walk
Yeah.
down the street and remember what he looked like.
That's true. Well, it says in Isaiah 53, I think, that there's nothing about him that would draw us to him. He's not handsome or looking like Clark Kent or anything like that.
It's kind of funny you say that. when my daughter was a young little girl, everybody just swooned over her, thought she was the most beautiful little girl, and you know how many people gave us stuff because she was so cute. We had a guy come up to us in Kmart, if you even remember Kmart.
Oh wow, yeah,
And he said, "Your daughter's just so beautiful. Here's $10, buy her something."
wow.
And we went to a restaurant, and she kind of batted her eyes at the waiter, and he brought her an ornament off the tree. And I think, we treat beautiful people, we treat wealthy people completely different than we treat poor, and I don't know if I want to say ugly people, but not beautiful people.
Yeah.
We treat them completely different.
Well, and I think they're right. It's Isaiah 53 verse 2, and it says, "There is no beauty that we should desire him."
Yeah.
And man, that's interesting to think of all these pictures we have of Christ, of course,
Yeah.
and we could get into that whole discussion
Oh,
too.
yeah,
What did Christ really look like? Well, it's even funny we talk about that because there's even debate on what time of year he was born.
Yeah, I've talked to several people and look it up online all the time just to see what people think. And I've seen people talk about him being born in the spring and in the summer and even in the fall. And some of the Christians, like what we here in the West would look at December 25th, or
Yeah.
at least December time is his birthday, and your Orthodox they're what, January 6th. They're in January
Yeah. Somewhere
sometime.
in January, yeah.
Even until I think the second week in January, they
Yeah.
think.
Well, even the Orthodox has a different day for Easter as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So it got to be different. I guess the schism was further than just theology.
Yeah.
But but like you were saying, not only that, there's even a debate on what year it was.
Yeah, there was a priest who took the genealogies that everybody despises reading because they're so, number one, can you pronounce all the names just right and whatever. But if you take those genealogies, you can actually come around to dates.
Yeah.
And of course, he worked it back and called 0 when Christ was born. And there's some contention that he may have missed that by a few years. And I think that comes back to the Jewish calendar.
Yeah, because I think the Jewish calendar is at 360 days.
Yeah, it's 5 days short. Once you start adding up 2,000, 5 days short, it becomes a little bit off.
And man, I could be completely wrong, but I thought I remember there being a 13th month on a separate year. They would do a 13th month to catch up or something.
Right. So here in the West, we have something called leap year.
Yeah.
And so every 4 years we have an extra day. And I think that the Jewish calendar added something extra.
Yeah.
1 year out of every, and I don't even know what to tell you that was.
Sure.
But they would add some.
What type of evidence then do we really have of the birth year?
Well, we do know that Herod the Great, and I've got my cheat sheet here because I'm not good enough to remember it all, but Herod the Great died between March 29th and April 11th of 4 BC. So we know that Jesus was born around that time. He couldn't have been born after 4 BC.
Okay.
So it has to be between 5 and 4 BC that he was born.
So where do you get the 5? Yeah, don't forget.
We're going backwards.
Time goes up going backwards because
So-
the further you get away from the time of the birth of Christ, the higher the year. And, of course, the further you get away from it going forward, the higher the year.
Yeah, it gets confusing in the head. So
Yeah.
let's not use early and late terms. Let's use different terms. Let's say 4 BC would be, and I can't use it's hard. The latest
The
date he
latest.
could be born was 4 BC.
Yeah.
The earliest he could be born is 5 BC.
Okay.
Because he had to be born around the time that Herod died.
Sure. Well, and an interesting thing I found out just a couple of weeks or so ago was the fact that everyone wants to say, well, it's BCE now. And
Oh yeah.
I didn't realize that was actually the E part but it was added by Jewish people because they don't want to recognize Christ. So it wasn't before Christ; it's before Common Era now they want to use. But so we're thinking somewhere between 4 and 5 BC, based on the death of Herod,
Right.
and the priesthood of Zechariah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's how we narrow that in. Now, we can actually narrow it down to January at the latest.
Okay.
And the way we do that is we said, okay, Herod died between March 29th and April 11th of 4 BC, okay?
Uh-huh.
In the Bible, it says that it was 2 months before Herod's death is when Jesus was born.
Oh, yeah.
So that takes us back to January. So it had to have been in January at the latest.
At the latest.
At the latest, because we need 2 months till Herod dies.
So any time between January and December really works out pretty well for the birth of Christ.
Yep, because Zacharias was in his priestly duties.
Yeah.
And that's a time thing. That's something every priest, I think just about every priest had an opportunity to do this once in their lifetime.
Yeah. Serve as a high priest. Yeah.
And this was his one-time shot. Remember, he was Elizabeth's husband, who was the mother of John the Baptist, who was a cousin of Jesus.
Yeah, because Elizabeth was a cousin to Mary, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So they were related, And Zacharias, if you remember right, he was doing his duties in the temple. And remember, each one of these priests had one opportunity in their lifetime to do this.
Yeah.
And they were able to calculate back to roughly the time that Zacharias was in those priestly duties.
Yeah.
So remember, the angel came to Zacharias and said, "Your wife is going to have a baby." And he laughed and he said, "No, no, 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 she won't." And so he was muted. He couldn't speak.
Yeah.
And so he couldn't speak until John the Baptist was born.
Yeah. I wonder if Elizabeth appreciated that.
I don't know. Probably so. My wife would probably be happy if I quit talking. But it says, and we can't be 100% for sure, but it looks like when we go backwards and add up according to when the temple was destroyed on August 5th of 70 AD, and we go backwards and we calculate through the priestly courses, we end up of the week between the 2nd and the 9th in October that he was there doing his priestly duties. Then you have to add 6 months onto that because remember, Elizabeth was 6 months pregnant when Mary conceived.
Yeah.
That puts us at the end of December of 5 BC. So that's the earliest date Jesus could have been born is in December of 5 BC.
Well, a lot of people get that wrong. They say, well, that's too late because the baby leapt. Well, Jesus didn't leap.
No, correct.
John leapt.
Correct.
So Jesus wouldn't have been old enough to cause the internal feeling of the baby kicking and moving yet.
Exactly. Now, some other things that are kind of neat to know about this is the earliest church indication or what they celebrated was a midwinter birth.
Yeah.
In fact, Hippolytus, he lived between 165 and 235 AD, also gives the date of December 25th of 5 BC when Jesus was born.
Now that's not in correlation with the winter solstice or anything, is it?
No, the solstice is on the 20th.
Okay. So really, the adaptation of the 25th wasn't a pagan thing brought in; it was an early church belief.
Yes.
Okay.
So everything points to that there is an outstanding possibility that Jesus was born between December and January, between the years 5 and 4 BC. Because remember, it goes backwards.
Yeah. Now I have a question though. When you talk about the latest he could have been born was in 4, because that's when Herod died. But didn't the wise men come after he was already a babe? Well, not a baby. He was a young child.
It says in the Bible that they came to the house, so they're no longer in a cave.
Yeah.
Where the young child was.
Yeah.
It wasn't a baby in swaddling clothes now. So we have a representation of here.
Yeah.
Of the wise men. I don't think the wise men were at the cave at the manger. I think they were a few months behind that.
Sure. And the wise men is a whole another subject that's so interesting to talk about. I've long since come to appreciate the wise men way more than I ever did before, just because of the significance of what's really happening with them.
Yes. I think that we underestimate the wise men and Herod and Jerusalem's response to the wise men coming.
Yeah. Well, in the text, they're really called magi, right? If I remember correctly, they weren't just wise men. I think that the Greek there is magos or something like that. Is that what it is in that verse?
I don't remember.
That's is that Luke?
Matthew 2.
Matthew 2. Yeah, I think that's here. Let's see, born in Bethlehem of Judea.
Yeah, magoi.
Yeah, magos is what I've got here. Magos meaning a name given to the Babylonian Chaldeans,
Yeah.
or Chaldeans, however you choose to pronounce it, the Medes and the Persians. So it's really, really important that that is there. And I wish that my Bible translation called them the Magi,
Yeah. Yeah.
because there's another place we see the Magi in the Bible.
Absolutely, and it's kind of a fantastic story in and of itself, and how all this came to be.
Well, it's very important. I mean, if you go into the book of Daniel, and you really start to see where in the world these Chaldeans ever got the idea that there was to be a Messiah born in Bethlehem Ephrata, and that he was going to be the King of the Jews.
Well, let me ask you a question. This goes back to who were the Chaldeans?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I've never gotten to that study.
They were considered kingmakers.
Well, that's what the Magi. That's what I guess I've always understood. Not the Chaldeans, but that are Chaldeans. I've always understood that being the Magi were the kingmakers.
I guess I was always under the impression those were one and the same people.
Yeah. Well, we talk about Daniel chapter 1 here, and Daniel chapter 1 verse 4 says they were taking children from Jerusalem that were without blemish. It says children in whom no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom and cunning and knowledge and understanding science. Such had the ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning in the tongue of the Chaldeans. And then it goes on to say that there were a few of these. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or who most of us know as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel as Belshazzar, right?
Yep.
And so these are the children of Israel taken away into the Chaldeans.
Yes.
And Daniel, of course, everyone knows this amazing dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, and he demands that they tell him about the dream, and Daniel prays, and he's able to interpret the dream. And
Not only that, but he gives the dream.
Yeah, he tells the dream and the interpretation thereof, and but what that earns him a special favor.
Yes.
He becomes the leader of the Magi.
Yeah, he's put over everything, and what's interesting about Daniel is not only is he put over all of the others, when the next king takes over, he remains second in charge in the Medes and the Persians empire.
Yes. Yep.
So he's been with the wise men. It kind of has the feeling that the wise men just traveled from king to king. A different king came, but the same wise men,
Yeah.
the same advisors advised that new king.
See, here it is, Daniel. This is in chapter 2, I believe, verse 46. It talks about here, then King Nebuchadnezzar, this is after he told him the dream and what it meant. He said, fell upon his face and worshiped Daniel and commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odor unto him. The king answered unto Daniel and said, of truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man, gave him many gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief of the governor over all the wise men of Babylon. So we can see biblically it's correct. Daniel is the leader of the wise men, or the Magi. And so these kingmakers that run from place to place crowning kings are getting their input hundreds and hundreds of years before the birth of Christ, that there's a Savior coming to the Jews.
You know, if you look back at Daniel, and I don't have it pulled up here, but in Daniel chapter 9, verse 26, it says that the Messiah would be cut off.
Yeah.
And given a certain year from the time that they started to rebuild the wall until when the Messiah would be cut off was 483 years.
Yeah.
So these guys would have had that information and known that in order for someone to rule, I think in that day, they were like 30 years old, and that just about when you were considered ready for leadership.
No, you had several kings that were under the age of 18.
That's true, but I don't know that they ruled without advisors.
Sure.
But so they would say, well, in order for the king to be king, had to be 30 years before,
Yeah.
or something like that. So they figured out when he would be born, and it helped that they had this thing behind us.
Yeah. Well, and one of the other things that and I made all the ladies at my church so angry at me one day because I said, a lot of you have these camels, and in fact, there was one at our church, a nativity scene that had these huge camels, and the wise men were mounted on the camels, and they're like 18 inches tall. They're walking in on these. I said, well, I don't want to anger too many of you, but the wise men didn't ride camels.
That's interesting.
The wise men, as they were kingmakers, and this goes back to exactly how Herod in Jerusalem reacted to this situation. They say at some points they could have had up to 300 people riding with them, and they rode Arabian stallions.
Wow.
They were not slow moving. They were almost a battalion of men, and they were the kingmakers. That's what they were known for, kingmakers from the east. And so while there may have been some camels in their party bringing supplies,
Yeah.
most of them are riding these Arabian stallions. So when you think about 300 or so people descending on Jerusalem, going up to Herod and saying, "Where is he that's born King of the Jews?" And of course, first thing Herod does is like, "Hey, I'm the King of the Jews.
Right.
They gave me that title." And of course, then they're terrified that these kingmakers are coming to crown a king that's not him.
The other thing I find interesting about that is it says, and all of Jerusalem were troubled.
Yes.
So King Herod was troubled, and so was all Jerusalem. Well, I don't think it was necessarily the people, but the people could have been.
Yeah.
But you think about what it says later in the Bible when it's talking about Jesus, and it says, we need to kill Jesus because it's better if one dies
Yeah.
and many are saved, and we get to keep our status and stay alive. So I think all of the rulers were probably on the take or doing something they
Sure.
shouldn't be doing, and so I think they had vested interest in keeping Herod on the throne.
Oh, well, of course. And I think the other thing that's troubling is just look at we just went through an election.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
we
yeah.
had people that were very troubled up until the election day, and then half of the nation got a little calm.
Yeah.
And the other half of the nation is still a little troubled. So I think maybe when you start talking about changing the ruler of a nation, they start to get a little worried about, well, what's it going to be? How's he going to rule? Am I in trouble? Am I not in trouble? And I think I could see that really being a problem.
I still find it fascinating the gifts that they brought Jesus.
Yeah.
And it was, here we are where we were talking about Jesus being born into a poor way, a poor situation, and yet these kingmakers brought kingly gifts to Jesus. And then what happens right after they leave? Herod wants to put all these babies to death.
Yeah. Well, you don't want to be usurped by anybody else.
No. He was crazy. He was killing his own family, his sons, and all sorts of stuff.
But little does Herod know he's only got a couple months left anyway.
That's right.
Well, it was interesting, and most people think that there were 3 wise men. That's why we get
yeah,
the number. Like, hey, wait a minute, there might have been 300 of these guys, and it was because there's 3 gifts mentioned. So they say, well, there's 3 wise men.
Exactly.
Well, that's I guess you could say that's a reasonable assumption, but I don't know that we want to jump to things.
I think it would be tight cramped to put 300 up here, but it's interesting how God takes care of things.
Yeah.
And it shows me how God cares for stuff.
Sure.
And he cared for his son.
Yeah.
And he knew that everybody would say to me, well, Dave, how come Jesus, look at all these poor babies,
Yeah.
2 years old and younger that were killed by Herod,
Yeah.
and Jesus escaped that. Well, only for 33 years.
Yeah. They were still going to kill him no matter what.
He just put it off, and he had a ministry he had to complete before that death could happen. But the wise men's gifts facilitated his journey.
Yes.
To Egypt. Without that, they couldn't have even begun to go to Egypt.
Well, now we get into a whole other situation because everyone says, well, see, the Bible's for immigration because Jesus went to Egypt.
Yeah.
What do you think about that statement?
I think that immigration is a tricky word The first thing is there's different types of immigration.
Well, come on now. You're just being semantics here now, right?
I think that makes a difference.
Yeah.
It makes a difference in how you address things and how things go. If somebody is a migrant that comes through a port of entry,
Yeah.
someone that the authorities know about or welcome,
Yeah.
I think that's fine. But when you sneak in the back door,
So you mean legal versus illegal?
exactly. So illegal, there is no evidence that Jesus was an illegal
There's
alien.
not one shred of
He
evidence to
was
that.
a legal migrant,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that he picked up and whatever needed to be done in that nation, assumed in that nation, and then once the Herod had passed away,
Yeah.
he went back in.
Well, I would assume that his father, being a carpenter, as they call it, or tecton, and I don't know if we've ever really studied that out to know if does that really mean woodworker or does that mean
I think that
stoneworker?
means construction worker of types.
Yeah.
He probably worked with all sorts of different materials.
So he probably would have been versed in stone and wood and many
Yeah.
other things to construct, to build.
Yes.
And of course, why not have the job of a builder? He was the builder from the beginning, right? Jesus
Yep.
was. He said, why not follow his stepfather's footprints? Because he actually laid the foundations of the earth himself.
Yeah, it says in the Bible that that Jesus is the beginning of all creation, and some of the Jehovah's Witnesses would say, well, that
Yeah.
means that Jesus was created, and it's like, no, he's the head of creation. He
Yes.
created everything. He is over creation.
Well, and for many years, I would have answered the question wrong if somebody asked me who created the world.
Oh yeah,
I would have said God the Father, but then we read in John 1, it says that it was Jesus because it says in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
yes,
And then it says everything was made by
by
him,
him.
and in him everything consists. So if he decides to let go of it, boom, it's gone.
Yep.
And so it's an interesting thing to think of. But so he wasn't an illegal immigrant in Egypt.
Right.
When he came back to Jerusalem, when he came back to Nazareth, I should say, he came back to his homeland.
Yep.
He didn't have to be deported. So I think if he was illegal, he might have had to be deported. So he willingly came back after Herod was gone
Yes.
and settled in Nazareth, which is, I believe, where Joseph was from.
I think so. I think that's where they were living at the
Living,
time.
I should say living, because he was from Bethlehem. That's why they went down to be
Correct.
taxed in Bethlehem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Nazareth is where they decided to settle their family.
Exactly. Yeah, and one of the things that we looked at was the genealogy
Yeah.
of Jesus, if you will. Because the Messiah had to be of the seed of David,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
root of David, and so by following that genealogy down, we find out that both Mary and Joseph were both of the
Yeah.
root of David, the descendants of David directly, and Joseph would have been through Solomon,
Yes.
and Mary is through Nathan.
Yes. So if I remember right, one of them is like a blood,
Yes, so
and the other
Mary
is a ruling.
So Mary is actually a priestly line.
Yeah.
Remember her Zacharias and
Yeah,
Elizabeth are
yeah.
a priest, and she, of course, is what gives Jesus his bloodline
Yeah.
because Jesus doesn't have an earthly father.
Yep.
He was born of a virgin, and so he gets his bloodline from his mother, which is his priestly line too.
Yeah.
Now Joseph is his adoptive father.
Okay.
Now, through that, he's an adopted king. So now Jesus is priest and king by his lines, one bloodline, one adoptive. And remember, the thing I find fascinating about that Joseph's line is Joseph has a character named Jeconiah in it. Jeconiah and his father and his brothers were so wicked that God curses that line
Yeah.
and says nobody from this person will ever sit on the throne again.
So it matters that he's with Joseph by adoption and not by blood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I just found it fascinatingly awesome that both Mary and Joseph are of the line of David
Yeah.
through different sons, and one of them is the bloodline priest, one of them is the adopted line king. Jesus is the king priest
Wow.
Messiah. And it had to be Joseph and Mary. You had to have that lineage
Sure.
to line up.
So you think that maybe Mary was picked, first of all, for her lineage, not
Yeah.
that she was the favorite of all the women of the world.
No, I think she was picked for her lineage, and I think she was a good, moral, upstanding Jewish
A
young
good
lady.
Jewish young lady.
Yes.
And she wasn't full of grace, because there's a whole idea that she's full of grace, therefore she was sinless, because she was so full of grace she couldn't sin.
So that goes back to what we call the Immaculate Conception.
Now, wait a minute. The Immaculate Conception is about Jesus, right?
Oh, absolutely not. And forever I thought it was. I thought,
I did too.
why would somebody think that Mary was born without a father and born holy?
I had no clue until I was in my 40s
Yeah.
that they were speaking of Mary when they talk about that. How many times my Catholic friends would say, "Oh, well, we believe in the Immaculate Conception." I'm like, "Well, yeah, Jesus was born of a virgin."
Yep.
But that's not
That's not
all
what
what
it
they're
is.
talking about.
No, they're talking about Mary. They're putting Mary up on a higher pedestal
Yeah, yeah.
than Jesus, in fact.
Well, according to them, and I know they won't say it to your face. You have to go through the catechisms and read their doctrine. But Mary is basically the co-author of salvation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
She dispenses grace just like Jesus would.
Mary, you're supposed to pray to her. You're supposed to worship her. You ask her for things, and one of the arguments I've heard them make in the past was, well, it's not that we believe Mary will give it to us, but we think that Mary has her son's ear.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, my question for them is, Jesus died for you,
Yeah.
and now you are a son
Yeah.
of God. So why wouldn't God listen to his children
Sure.
over a woman who gave birth to the...
Well, Romans 8:14, your sons, your offspring of God now, your
Yes.
heirs, your joint heirs. And so why wouldn't you just go, and it says we cry Abba, we cry
Yes.
Daddy.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you just go, Daddy, I want this intercession, I need this.
We're praying to God the Father as Daddy.
Yeah.
I mean, we are calling God a intimate relative name.
Well, when you try to corner some of those people who are willing to debate you on this subject, they'll say, well, we're not really praying to Mary. We're asking Mary to intercede for us, just like you would ask your friend, hey, pray for me this week. I'm having a hard week.
Yeah, I just don't see it. I think that God said you only pray and worship to one being,
Yeah.
and that's God, and we see him in three persons.
Yep.
And I know that there's a big argument of whether or not the Trinity is true, and I can't explain the Trinity indefinitely or in definite terms, but that's okay.
Sure.
But the Bible talks about it in Trinity. In fact, you can go back to Genesis and see that God said, let us
Yep. Elohim.
make man in our image.
They use the pluralized version of God, saying Elohim. And really, even look at this when Christ tells the disciples what to do. I think it's in Matthew. He says, go forth baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Yep.
There's another reference, perfect reference in my idea, that there is a triune God. Now, when they say, well, we're just asking her to pray for us. Well, how do you ask a person that's passed from this world to the next to pray for you?
I don't even, this is going to sound weird. I don't know what you believe, but I don't think when you die, you're instantly with the Lord. I think your body is still on earth, in the grave, burned to ashes, whatever it is.
Yep.
It's gone, and you're in the presence of God, and you have no connection to this earth.
I think you're absolutely correct.
And I think when the witch, was it the witch of Endor, that Saul went to visit because he wanted to talk to Solomon, and she screams when Solomon shows up.
Yeah.
Because when Samuel shows up.
Samuel shows up.
Because before, I think she just talks to a demon.
Sure. Yeah.
And this time it actually happened.
Well, and then the next point to that is, I will say something like, "Well, I think if you think you can pray to Mary, who's passed from this life to the next, that you're equating her with deity." And
Yes,
they go, "No, we're not." I said, "Well, then explain how she's not omnipresent but can hear you pray."
exactly. Because she has no deity in her to do. She's not omnipresent, omniscient. She's nothing.
Yeah.
She's just a person.
But then they say, "Well, what about the verse that says we got such a great cloud of witnesses watching us run our race?"
Well, I think that refers to angels.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's also the great cloud of witnesses waiting to see our finish of the race.
Oh yeah.
I think not that they're down here cheering us on as we do our race on this earth or walk our walk with God. I think it's they'll be cheering us on at the finish line.
Yeah, and carrying us to the bosom of the
Yeah,
Father.
yeah.
So I think praying to her is useless. I don't think your prayer is going anywhere.
No,
And I think that you're actually going against the teaching of God.
I think so too.
And
How do they get around the verse that says there's one mediator
yeah,
between God and man,
right.
the man Christ Jesus?
And the Spirit utters
Yeah.
when we pray. The Spirit helps us pray because
Yeah.
we pray amiss.
Yeah. Well, and I heard something really interesting the other day about that. Speaking of uttereth and tongues and whatnot, somebody said that the Spirit makes intercession for us sometimes, or says prayers, I should say, is correcting our words.
Correcting our words. Yeah, and I think that's true because it says with sounds that we don't understand.
Yeah, yeah. That doesn't mean we're sitting there going blah 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 blah
No,
blah blah.
no,
We're not doing the old Yosemite Sam stuttering, say whatever else comes. And the funny thing I find about the tongues whole thing, and I know this is a side subject, but how many of them say that they have divine tongues, but they all sound the same,
yeah,
but nobody knows what they're saying?
yeah.
I thought they were supposed to do tongues without an interpreter.
Right. I think the tongues were given for people to hear the
Yeah.
word of God, and if
Yeah.
there's no one there that can speak that language, then what good is it for you to speak that language?
So speaking that language, now there are some people who would say that tongues is such an angelic language that nobody knows it. Only God reveals it to those who need to hear it. But some would say that that's actually speaking a tongue that's not native to you, meaning I would certainly speak Italian or
Right.
Russian or French or something.
Yeah, I think that when you actually study that out in the Bible, that it's languages.
Languages.
When the
Known
King James
languages.
says tongues, it means other languages, not an unidentified mystical language.
Sure.
And I think Paul pokes fun at them when he says, even if you spoke in the language of angels,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
you're doing it for your own edification. You're doing it to lift yourself. I don't think he'd be any different than the priest of that time. You know,
Vain, long. They call it vain repetition or long, long. And now, and we really are coming full circle back to. Remember, we talked about how the people were terrified of Jesus coming in as the king and offsetting their little monopoly or their corruption. And I keep looking back at, I think it's Luke, where it talks about beware of those in the long robes that preferred that want the preferred seating and make widows' houses a spoil, or it takes all the money from the widows and all that. So I think it's just interesting how one of the religious entities right now, because that's what they are, their religion, their man-made religion, wears these long robes and prefers the best seating and prefers to tell you what you ought to know and understand about the Bible.
absolutely. And I find it interesting that those people also can charge you to commit sin. You know, I can go in there and pay him a 5 spot to.
Well, they'll tell you they don't sell indulgences anymore.
Well, you know, you say that, and we just saw their what was it, Jubilee year 2025, and I watched a little non-binary girl with blue hair that waves her wand and absolves you of sin.
Wow, I tell you, I can tell you right now that you can still. We'll just say this for right now. you can still put a loved one's name on a prayer card,
Yeah.
and they'll put it on the altar during Mass for a fee,
Yeah.
and that Mass will go to helping them get out of purgatory. So they're still selling sin. They're still selling a replacement for sin.
Yeah. They're selling indulgences, is what.
Yeah.
Of course, we don't do that, but they do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've got a whole book on it at home. I got an actual book printed by the Catholic Church of local indulgences that you can pray to Mary for a partial indulgence. What? I thought you didn't say you pray to Mary.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. It says right there in the bold letters, prayer to Mary. And they have prayer to Joseph in there.
Wow. That's amazing. I didn't know about the Joseph, but
Yeah, I'll have to get that out sometime. We'll take a look at it.
it's amazing how we could take Scripture and twist it and fold it however we want to make it say whatever we want. You know, I've even been guilty of this. You know, you had this preconceived idea in your head,
Yeah.
and then you try to find scriptures to back that up, and you can find a scripture for anything
Sure. If you take it out of context.
if you take it out of context. You know, one of the things I find fascinating in the Bible is such a unique book.
Yeah.
It's the only book that I know of that the main character is one person all the way through.
Yeah.
But that person tells you of all of the shortfalls that have happened to all of the people.
Yeah.
Now, most of the time when men write a book, what's the one thing they leave out? Every time they messed up.
Yeah.
And the Bible records every one. In fact, the Bible records lies.
Yep.
It records the lies that people tell.
Now, it doesn't approve of them.
Doesn't approve of them.
It tells them, look what happens when you lie.
Exactly. So, you know, even if you look at Sapphira,
Yeah.
you know, they
Wow,
lied. What about the book of Job? You know, all the theology that those guys had that were wrong, you know,
With
that's
friends
recorded.
like that, who needs an enemy?
That's right. So the Bible is a very unique book. It records everything, and you've got to know who, what, where, when.
Yeah.
If something was written.
So context matters.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I enjoy that we've had a good conversation here. I think next time what we ought to start talking about is this little angel here, which is represented as a female.
That's right. That was a very interesting conversation there.
So maybe next time we'll talk on that.
All right.